Welcome to today's ILTA YouTube video entitled The KM GenAI Positive Feedback Loop. I'm your moderator, Kat Freeman, Legal Technology Innovation Solutions Analyst at Alston & Bird. And I'm excited to be joined today by Cindy Baer, Chief Data and Innovation Officer at Frost Brown Todd, and Stephen Bedford, Product Director at Clearpeople. Before we get started, can each of you give us a brief introduction? Cindy, let's start with you.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Kat. I am the Chief Data and Innovation Officer at Frost Brown Todd. Was able to start that team about 3 years ago, and it includes things like our knowledge and research services, legal project management, and our data and analytics teams as well. So very extended. Otherwise, I've been involved in KM in large law firms for more than 20 years at this point. So lots of experience in all kinds of different practices and sizes of law firms.
Terrific. Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. Stephen Bedford. I'm the Product Director at Clearpeople. I have overall responsibility for our Atlas platform. Atlas is a platform that we target to international law firms. It has 3 primary capabilities: knowledge management, intranet, and extranet. And I'm really here focusing on the knowledge management capabilities of the product today and the AI capabilities that sit on top of that. So I'm not going to talk about the product during this session, but I'm really just going to share our experiences across our base of clients and how they're leveraging this technology and how they're enabling their own staff to benefit from the use of this technology. So any insights I can give today? I'm happy with
That's
that.
great. Thank you. Thank you both. All right, let's dive in. So thinking about how we begin to start or we keep running this KM GenAI positive feedback loop, can you guys share some examples where GenAI leverages existing content to add to the knowledge base? I'm going to let you guys just duke it out with whoever wants to start.
Stephen, I think you have a great business development related use case. So why don't you start there? And
I'll sure, absolutely. Yeah, so business development is a great area to talk about because it tends to be one of the more, or can be one of the more innovative arms of a firm, because that is the revenue generating arm of the firm. Yeah, so managing partners tend to have some emphasis on how capable that department is. And some of the things that we've been working with BD firms over the last couple of years now is how they can make best use of the content that they've been creating over many years in respect to winning new clients and winning new business from existing clients, for example. And some of the recent ones we've been working on, ones that I particularly like are where the BD teams are able to inquire over gold standard content. Yeah, so having content that's been graded appropriately, has been curated appropriately, etc., is really important, because that's when they really put their best foot forward in terms of creating content. But one of the things that we've been working on is when firms have actually created content and have submitted their final proposals into an RFP response, for example, we're then actually able to, using AI technology, effectively chunk up that content into component parts and then let the AI actually attach metadata automatically to that content to enrich it, and then enable that content to then be put back into the knowledge base as content to fuel the next round of business development activities. So you've got this sort of circular, virtuous loop, if you like, of content creation, then letting AI enrich the content to then have that content used again in the next round of content creation. And that type of loop is I think, a perfect scenario where you have people helping to create and then having AI augment that process for them automatically. It's a good story to tell as well, but the great thing is it genuinely adds value. If you can get those responses out the door faster, you can ensure you've got your highest quality content in those responses, and if we can then leverage that content for another day, especially in international firms. You could have a lawyer, a BD person working out of the London office, working on an international matter, where only 3 months earlier a colleague in Seattle had worked on a very, very similar matter, and having that ability to share that content seamlessly and make it available seamlessly is really important.
Yeah, I love the idea, Stephen. And I would say, not just your content for RFPs, which might typically be sort of your pre-written practice group descriptions and things like that, industry team descriptions, but also your thought leadership, right? You could do the same with a firm's body of thought leadership. Thankfully ours is pretty metadata complete, but I'm sure many firms don't have that, benefit. So it's a good idea to be able to take your thought leadership content and draw some metadata out of it. And then you can use it on your intranet. You can use it in RFPs. You can, make sure you're pulling together your best content, even when a lawyer is searching for who in the firm knows about this topic, right? Which is a very common KM question, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just on that very topic, actually, we were in a session this morning with it was actually a Middle Eastern client of ours where they're asking questions of, who is an expert in this particular area. But then, okay, I found somebody. Okay, now tell me which projects have they actually worked on in the past, which have been successful in delivering the following outcome. And it's that concept of sort of having humans to be able to continue to inquire, but then actually do something with the generated output. Actually now get draft an email for me, and pick some research articles that you may think are relevant for me to send this prospect. They can transform the way people work in those areas.
Well, I think that leads into sort of our next question too, is so how are we using AI to enrich the data? And I think you were starting to talk about that, whether it's, for extraction, deal terms, things like that. So can we talk about the enrichment there?
Sure. Yeah, we've been actually using a couple different tools for this, but one example I'll use is working with a product that you can upload a finalized deal document, and it will extract all of the deal terms from a completed transaction and also help you create a summary narrative of what happened in that matter. And in our case, we're flowing that data directly into our foundation, firm intelligence system. So exactly what you were talking about, Stephen, all of our experience, how do we know who has experience in this area? Particularly industry related experience is important to our firm. So, we're doing that. We've also done things like use GenAI to look at case information that we get from a courthouse news feed and match it up to our clients so that we can alert our attorneys about litigation that's happening. And we can also use that in competitive intelligence overviews to help understand the volume of litigation that's happening. So there's almost an unlimited amount of great examples for metadata extraction. I think these are things that we've had tools to do this for a long time, but with GenAI, they've become so much more powerful and more accurate, things that we can actually rely on at this point. So I'm very excited about that use case.
I mean, just summarizing those, Cindy, I mean, how hard has it been to get lawyers and practitioners to actually summarize the content that they've created? Yeah, just having a tool that does that for you, again, can be game changing. Just having a very simple summary, and that summary itself can be used in an AI context, later on down the line. They sound true, but they're not.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because even things like, we often do lease abstracts. Well, having the lease abstract itself is something that's really helpful to the client, but having a lease abstract also in our, in our net document system, for example, so that you can locate it there, right, gives you a very quick overview of whether or not that's useful for you to, review. And so I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think even the summaries can really feed into better KM.
That's great. So those are kind of like more individual cases, but talk to me about scaling that in a larger capacity. Even for smaller firms, they're going to have the need for scale. So
yeah, absolutely. We recently had a firm join us. We took on the entire firm as laterals, and so it was 7 attorneys. And it was, as most smaller firms do, some of their intake processes, conflicts checking, are a little bit more manual. They're a little bit more Word document based than, they don't have a database of all their parties, for example. So one of the things that we did, they were very good at capturing lots of information on what we might call a client information sheet, right? These were all just Word documents. And what we wanted to do and needed to do was extract the parties that were involved in their matters. Sometimes they had them in a particular place on that Word information sheet, and other times they just had kind of an interested parties list with everybody involved. And so we were able to use a tool from Snowflake, which is our data lake, called Document AI. And we were able to extract multiple pieces of data from that, including all of the parties involved and what the role of those parties are. And that really helped us run conflicts and enter data to open new matters much more quickly. And that was, we I think ultimately received about 700 of those sheets and were able to process them and create this whole process to do this and process them in less than 2 weeks.
Can't imagine doing that manually.
I cannot either. And that was the first suggestion was, oh, well, we need a team of LPAs to come in and, help type this up. And I was like, oh, let's see what we can do. So, and it's a virtuous loop because that, of course, everything we do in intake also feeds our entity store. We use GenAI to help do that as well. Unfortunately, our parties aren't normalized in intake, but they are normalized in our Snowflake because we were using some AI tools for that as well.
So, in speaking about speed, how have you seen outside of this particular use case, Cindy and Stephen, how is AI accelerating that knowledge collection to be used, in this loop, going forward and even retroactively looking back at things?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think one of the things I find really interesting today, and we've had a couple of clients approach this problem in a couple of different ways, is that when we talk about knowledge, obviously the amount of written knowledge is a tiny segment of the actual knowledge that exists within a firm, because most of it is in our brains. And I think one of the things I really like, and it's a very detailed use case we're building out now. We're hoping to have a case study on this very soon, but one of the things that this particular firm wants to be able to do is to extract tacit knowledge from their experienced lawyers. So lawyers that may have been at the firm for 20+ years, they're leaving soon, they're retiring soon. And one of the things that we want to be able to do is make it easy to capture that type of knowledge. And remember, this is knowledge at scale, because people have a huge amount of knowledge. If you take that across a 500-person firm, take that to a 15,000-person firm, you can imagine the volume of information that you could generate and knowledge that you could generate. So one of the things we're doing there is enabling people to just email using the good old-fashioned tool that lawyers still, live in and love, I should say. But just enabling to do what they call a knowledge drop. So basically, here's a piece of information that I have. I just drop it down in a simple format in an email or in a simple word attachment to an email, and all I do is hit the send button to that email address. What we're then doing there is we're having a model whereby the first thing that happens is that AI extracts metadata from that and actually determines which metadata tags should be applied to that. It then also builds a neat summary of that knowledge drop, and that knowledge is then actually inserted automatically into a knowledge base, which is then available for search, because let's not forget good old-fashioned search, which is still a tool heavily used, but also then available for AI. And one of the things that we've just been working on, I like to talk. You may already know that. I don't like to write things down as much. I'm a talker. And one of the things that we can also do now is, of course, we can extract speech through simple transcript. So if I want to impart a piece of knowledge now, I literally just hit the record button on Teams and I say the things that are in my mind. And that video, it's a video, but that recording actually just drops into an area where we can apply exactly the same concept. Tag that thought that Steve just had, maybe a bad one, I don't know, but actually then place that somewhere where it can then be used for other purposes. And that's something that I think we will see a lot more of. Whether these are exit interviews, think about having an exit interview when you go, actually just having that recorded, transcribed, enriched via AI, and then dropped into a knowledge base. And there's an enormous amount of knowledge that you could capture at that sort of level, I think. Cindy's laughing.
Yeah. Well, I would say that most lawyers would advise not to record your exit interviews, but
well, maybe.
But at the same time, I do think it's a fabulous idea for things like webinars. Like imagine the client webinars that a lot of our lawyers are, talking about very important topics, hot topics that are emerging right now. And if you can take those transcripts and then turn that into a more structured piece that's tagged with metadata, without lifting a finger, why would you not do that? Or that makes so much sense to me. I think what I'm seeing, and I'm thinking back to, 20 years ago when the gold standard was, someone who was retiring, who was a tax partner and he had all this knowledge and it was like, keep his email, please keep his email so we can search it, right? That was the gold standard. And at this point, I think, and I think KM went through a time where we curated less knowledge. We collected less knowledge banks, right? Brief banks, things like that, because maybe the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, right? It was too hard to find what you had just spent all that time collecting. It was too hard to maintain it. I think with Gen AI, right, the interest in those kinds of things is coming back. And, recently, for example, we collected a bunch of state agency memos on some type of regulatory rulings and guidance that they had. And we could, put that into a database that we ran with Gen AI and be able to review an issue for a client very quickly, including things that were conceptually similar, but not exactly the same, right? That's not typically the kind of thing that you would get. So it to me, it's this virtuous loop again, right? Where because we can get more powerful results and output, and I feel like I can trust that I'm finding the correct information, it's encouraging more of these curated collections to be put together, right? Which is something that,
Right.
we always wanted to be doing in KM in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, we've just got a few minutes left, and in that time, I do want to talk about how you're seeing AI help in creating a firm's taxonomy. This is a big topic, so I know we've only got a little bit of time, but if we can touch on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, well, it is a big topic. I think one of the things that we've certainly found is obviously there are taxonomy models out there. You've got Sally, you've got LexisNexis models, et cetera, et cetera. And in our experience, a lot of firms potentially start there. In our experience, what they tend to find though is that they're quite deep. They're automatically quite large, especially in smaller firms I'm talking about now, where trying to implement a model of that scale is difficult. But what we also know is that these firms have a wealth of content already at their disposal. Inside that content is a taxonomy model, undoubtedly. So being able to actually utilize AI to look at a volume of content, and you might bucket this up in stages. We might want to build out a subject or an area of law taxonomy model. We may want to build out a model that extracts entity content. We may want a model that extracts out activity content, and this could be as simple as things like matter codes and so on and so forth. So having AI doing that at scale means you can really, really, really accelerate a program of building a model based on the client's actual data, the client's actual use of business language, which the members of that firm are familiar with, because it's language they use, it's language they write down, and it's language that then can be used to power, search and empower AI. So we think that's a really interesting place. I mean, there's additional things that you could potentially do with that. We're working now on extending the use of synonyms within taxonomies and actually enabling us to build relationships based upon synonyms. So that's really exciting, and that's something that works really well in our experience. Actually, giving AI 15, 16, 17 documents and asking it to extract a taxonomy with some rules that you give it actually works really, really, really powerfully.
We have a couple of examples of that. So one of them is, as structured as most of our data is, we had a list of charitable organizations that our lawyers and professionals are involved in, and it was all text. And so people would come to us and say, well, how many people are involved in the American Heart Association? Or, what sorts of community organizations are we involved in? And so just running that list through GenAI helped us to start the process of normalizing it, right? And being involved in our community is a big part of what Frost Brown Todd is about. So that's something that was important to us, right? We wanted to create this, in that case, a taxonomy of entities, right? So we have much better understanding of how we're involved in those entities. And we do the same with matter types, right? We have changed our matter type taxonomy quite a bit, but we still see people choosing the wrong ones or choosing very generic ones like other business litigation. What is that? What is other business litigation? But when we use machine learning and we enhanced it with GenAI to make it even better, which is to say this person chose, other business litigation, but based on their description and other information, we think the matter type should be something else. And so that's really enhancing our taxonomy, but it's also really obviously paying lots of dividends when you go in and you say, I want to find a particular kind of litigation. You get much more specific matter type results, and it's easier to find experience and people with expertise in that area.
Yeah. Well, the other thing with entities is of course, being able to build out entity relationships, which is key. And again, being able to build out a knowledge graph, which you can then use to augment your AI, is something that, again, that's something we're certainly keen on building out in our own capabilities. And I think the technology is there. There's some emerging technologies which will make that possible, but that is definitely a topic for conversation.
Yeah, I think one of our people at Frostbound Todd is going to be involved in an upcoming ILTA webinar about that very topic. I think Kat has more info about that.
I do. I was just going to say, this is definitely a topic for a whole other session. And I thank you both for touching generally on that today. So yes, if anybody does want to learn more about the taxonomy and knowledge graphs, there is an upcoming ILTA session to be on the lookout for titled Building a Scalable Knowledge Graph for Law Firms. So sadly, this is the end of our session today. I can't thank Stephen and Cindy enough for your time and your insights with us today. This has been a fantastic discussion, and I wish we had scheduled 3 hours for it. But stay tuned, everyone, for the next upcoming KM and marketing content that's going to be coming out soon. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you very
so
much. It was more pleasure. Cheers, Cindy.